Okay, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for the opportunity to kind of discuss this FMEA kind of a little bit the different practice. And this is the presentation I gave at last year's World Conference. And along with that, there are serious like publications I'm going to show as well. And I definitely appreciate the opportunity to discuss it further with more people. Okay, so to make it more interactive, please feel free to chime in during my kind of talk, right? And just unmute and shout it out either for comments, questions, and I will try to get in certain slide, I will try to get the audience response as well. So, encouraged to participate. Okay. So before I kind of get into the content, just to quickly show my background, and hopefully you can see I've been primarily in Lean Six Sigma field, and the reason in recent years my primary focus has been generic or general quality management. In the same time, I'm involved in various aspects in SQ, so throughout years. Okay, agenda-wise, this is what I plan to cover within the hour. First, why this topic? And I want in various places I want to mention the shared practice is only applicable for certain situations, which is if you are not in extremely risk aversion situation and not regulated by customer or agencies and so forth. So let me change my pointer. I can show. Okay, so that's the first. And then I will get into a little bit kind of discussion on the situation of lack of data. And to me, that's one of the thing that make many of the FMEA struggle. And as part of that, I want to cover one, explore a little bit about what's the intended use of RPN. And from there, that springs to why we have the current practice that I'm sharing. And another, a little bit kind of discussion about ChatGPT. Nowadays, since it's quite popular, right? And I just want to leverage that to share some of the generically recognized practice in dealing with lack of data. And that lead to the simplified risk analysis practice that my FMEA Lite is based on. So that's the second part of the discussion about lack of data. And from there, that lead to the actual practice that I'm sharing, which is I labeled it as FMEA Lite or simplified. And you see I've done serious publications on this topic, and it may use various words that many of those are published in Quality Progress, and they try to find different like phrases to describe the thing. Okay. So one is to share a little bit of the special practice and then share some examples, one specific examples, and a little bit discussion on why kind of consider that diluted FMEA. To some people, my shared practice it's definitely unorthodox, and some people strongly against that. And in the same time, there could be some valuable things that can be leveraged no matter what situation that your application is in. So that's the plan for what's covered. Any comments, questions? Please feel free to chime in, right, for clarifications. Okay, so why this topic? One side I want to mention, as you can see, over years I've been sharing, publishing on related topics, and the most recent one is the one coming out this month on quality progress. What happened is all of those article level things, they have a size limitation, and the content of my presentation is too big. Usually it's 2,500 words, And I just couldn't cover everything in one article that end up with piecemeal. And that's why each of those has a little bit additional things, a little bit a different subset of things. And I just can never be able to put in one piece, which I also proposed earlier, which just couldn't be accommodated in one piece. Okay, so the serious publication, and then come down to why this topic. I need to mention, I recently changed the job. This application and the situation is for my previous environment, previous company. One thing is, we just had a struggle in the past couple of years at work that one side, engineers, they just reluctant to do FMEA. They just feel like for whatever has been done, it's not really value added to the point they see worth. So the return on investment isn't there. At the other side, some of the executives, for whatever the reason, just want to push for FMEA. And there were heated debate in my environment, and including myself, engaging in that debate. And as a result, I offer this accommodation of FMEA Lite. So essentially, it's like a simplified version of FMEA. And the reception is like mixed. Some people like it, some people don't. And including some of the key executives, they just doesn't like that. And that's what prompted of my recent serious discussion publication. I feel like a little bit formal discussion is worthy, and it's a way to sanction this practice or accommodation. And I do want to emphasize it again in various places, that is, it's only applicable to certain situations, which is like not extremely risk aversion and also not regulated by anyone. If there are those type of things, probably the simplified version will not be suitable. If it's regulated by agency or customer, you better follow whatever they want, they ask for. And in general, I think this practice is, again, it's unorthodox. And it can be considered controversial, but I can be sure it's a little bit thought-provoking, which means no matter if it's directly applicable to your environment, it's still worth to leverage certain aspect of this. So that's what behind the why this topic. Any comments, questions before I proceed?
Yeah, Gary, question. Why do you think the executives are more inclined to want this versus engineers who are actually the designers and in the trenches? I find that interesting.
Well, certainly we're in a very diverse environment, right? Particularly in this particular case, well, executive has their own interest. Some people, they feel like that's their trademark. They want to press for some, I mean, I actually, at the later part of this presentation, I have a little bit discussion on that.
Okay.
So there are various scenarios. Thanks, John, for the interaction, for the question, right? And I do have something I'm further elaborating, which is in the why diluted practice section. Yeah. Thanks again, John. Anyone else?
Nothing on chat.
Go ahead.
I said nothing on chat. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Yeah, I can monitor it a little bit as well. Okay, wonderful. So make it a little bit more engaging, right? Interactive. I mean, it's better that way, to have a dialogue instead of one-way lecturing. I want to bring this up. I mean, most of us have FMEA experience. In your with your experience, right? What's the biggest challenge that you see in FMEA? Let's hopefully let's take a couple of folks can chime in. I mean, there's no wrong answer. It's more of a experience based, and if after we collectively see more people, we will see some trend. So I'm curious, anyone want to chime in? What you see the biggest challenge in FMEA?
Getting people to get started, I think, is one of the biggest challenges.
Okay, okay. To get it started, to invest time, basically, right? To invest. It's a big effort actually for FMEA. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Don't mind to chime in. So let's make it a little bit more interesting, right? More engaging. So.
We got a couple things in chat. One said time consuming.
Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, Delia. Okay. Time consuming. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Delia is saying her mic isn't functioning as intended. Okay. And another is how do engineers prioritize effort if they have no FMEA? Okay, that's a good comment, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Okay. Yeah. So and also Duke. Yeah. Thanks everyone for chiming in. With that, let me share my summary. I mean, all of those are very good points. And later I can touch on like how to prioritize. It is actually in my previous environment they have an alternative which is similar to the FMEA Lite that I'm suggesting as accommodation. But there are alternative ways that people can identify risk and prioritize risk. Okay, so with that, I will share how I summarize it. Essentially, I mean, if it's a live session, we can collect a little bit more, and then we can see the group. So I try to summarize in this way, in two extreme scenarios. One scenario looks like this. I personally like this chart, this whatever kind of a lot. And that's actually one of my most favorite graph or whatever the cartoon through my PhD years, basically. So hopefully you get the point, right? Everyone get the point. I mean, you may be overdoing that, and after you have everything done, a cowboy will no longer be a cowboy. So essentially, in a way, it's like non-value added. I mean, you appear to be doing a lot, but it doesn't really help you. So that's one scenario. And so I'm trying to link to our like lean concept or whatever. In a way, like over processing is a sin in lean, basically, right? If we think from lean. So that's one extreme that hold people back from investing in FMEA if you don't do it properly. The other scenario, the other extreme, that is this. So no matter how you just handhold, band-aid, whatever, I mean, everything's fine. I can still drive my car. So no problem. In a way, it just, again, they just don't feel like, whatever the effort we put in, it's only a check on the paper. It doesn't really help, non-value added in a way. I don't know if anyone against that or not. I mean, if I summarize everything, it tends to the extreme case like that, holding people back from, running FMEA. And also I have a little more summary on that. So, and this picture hopefully tells a lot as well. And in one way, I consider, if I summarize everything, I consider effectiveness and efficiency is kind of the biggest challenge in FMEA. I mean, because it's a big investment, and if you get the needed return, in many cases, it's questionable. And that's why many of the engineers, once they don't see clear return investment, they are reluctant to go that route. So it partially answered John, but there are a little more discussion. Anyone disagree on this? Or comments or have a different thought? Okay, and more. The elephant in the room. There's another big one, and I'm very excited every time when I touch on this. That is the established FMEA practice. It missed one of the two dimensions. For business decision, you always need to consider return. You always need to consider cost. But the established FMEA practice, it only focus on the return. It doesn't focus or reflect any of the cost, which is a problem if you are in a business environment. And it's just a common sense. So return on investment, when you are missing one aspect of the two, there are some problems. Another part is I want to mention, I see this, it's not only limited to FMEA. It's true for root cause analysis as well. If you look at most of the established practice, I personally see it's a big shortfall. That majority of the root cause analysis is doing the same. They focus on the return side, but has no consideration of the cost. So that's a separate presentation, right? I also have on the root cause analysis. I believe I share that to this group as well. So that's the big elephant in the room. So everything considered and combined, a lot of people are held back for FMEA practice. A little bit more, a little bit further. So in a way, like the next section, I want to discuss a little bit lack of data. It's just because with everything we're talking about over here, lack of data is a big amplifier, and which is very common in many of the FMEA analysis or application. People struggle with meaningful and sufficient data. And it's extremely true in high mix, low volume environment. That happens to be my previous environment. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. High mix, low volume. You're extremely short of data. It's also true in the early stage of product development. So, in those various situations, people struggle a lot, lack of data, to support meaningful risk assessment. Any comments, questions? Okay, so look at the case that in my previous environment, semiconductor equipment. This particular one is a wafer metrology tool. They call that tool. It's a equipment, right? And or wafer inspection tool. Those type of product has those type of kind of interesting situation. Very expensive. Each unit is over $1 million. In the same time, the whole lifetime for a particular product line is just about several hundred. There is just not a lot of demand for wafer metrology. It's expensive, but not high volume. Either way, it's totally different from automotive environment, which the minimum is millions. So in that situation, if you look at a very typical scale of occurrence, this is common. It's one of the example, right? But it's a common, popular one in probably originated from automotive industry. If you look at the semiconductor equipment, either you have no failure, which probably can be mapped into low failure, the low occurrence situation. As soon as you see the first failure, it's going to put you into the high following this scale. And there's nothing in between. So that's a problem. Oh, sorry. It's from work. Okay. So you can, indeed, there are various ways you can customize. You can leverage similar product and component, or you can customize scale. You can do all of those. Still, we need to agree, no matter what you do, you are not going to get the same level of hair splitting like in automotive. Since we're talking about days and nights, right? Millions or hundreds. Anyone disagree or comment? Or, so that's kind of the extreme example that I'm trying to highlight. Comments? Okay. So with that, what are the options that we deal with lack of data? And as I mentioned, I will cover in those 3 areas. One, a little bit exploration on what's really the value of RPN. what value added of RPN, and a little bit ChatGPT's view, and then lead to simpler risk analysis, which is one of the comments in the chat. That is, if you don't do FMEA, how do you prioritize? There are simpler risk analysis practices and options. And that's what my previous environment engineers, they end up with. It just somehow, some of the examples, some of the executives, they just like to have their fingerprint on things. They like to push for FMEA format. But anyway, okay, a little bit discussion on what's really the value added of RPN. Can somebody chime in, or you want to share? What's shown over here are the typical practice, right? It's usually you set a threshold, and if it's above threshold, you need the actions, and below you don't have to. So to me, the primary use of RPN is to decide and quote unquote prioritize actions. You decide if to take action and which one to take first. Anyone want to comment or disagree? But there are problems. I mean, that's one of the bigger problem associated to FMEA practice. That is the evaluation or assessment of RPM. One side, per my experience, it's always highly subjective. No matter how much data you have, it's maybe some are more severe, some are lighter, but you always have that subjectivity. You never get complete, sufficient data to have very high confidence. That's one. Another part is also worth to highlight. That is, most of the time, RPN alone will not be the one to decide your actions. There are other factors to consider. For example, it's also common practice that is, many places they do that. That is, if your severity is high, like 9 or 10, it's by default, no matter what RPN it is, you need to take action. And another thing I notice is that's just unfortunate, just the way it's set up, the established practice. A lot of time when people are not as experienced, majority focuses on the RPN evaluation. So they, for whatever the reason, I consider is mistaken. That is, the focus is RPN assessment, which I feel like is really wrong focus. So that's one. Anyone feel free to chime in, right? If you have different thought. And the current direction is the AIAG new practice with the German automotive practice, the current version, basically. They're moving away from RPN, and which is a very controversial move, right? It's another separate discussion that we can have. But that is the direction that in automotive industry, at least the latest version switched to action priority matrix instead of RPN, because it's so controversial and so much pushback. And right now, the current practice, my understanding, automotive industry, they accepted both practice. The previous practice go by RPN, or the newer practice go by action priority matrix. Anyone from automotive industry you want to chime in? That's my current understanding. So overall, RPN spend a lot of time and not very reliable, essentially. That's the message. And a little bit more discussion about RPN and what's behind. I don't know how many people, anyone have is familiar with this book, The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less, by Barry Switzer. Anyone familiar with this? So the author is a psychologist. He studied the supermarket offering and find out an interesting thing. That is, the more choices you give, the bigger struggle the customer has. They just couldn't decide what to buy, and very high level anxiety that affect their sale actually. And it's just because they couldn't decide which one to go by. And so as a result, I mean, with that psychology thing, that is, if you offer fewer choices, it's easier to make decision, and it helps the sales. So that's kind of one of the direction that I'm leading to with simplified practice, basically. That's one. Another aspect, another example of this, same data, but if you look at it at different level of resolution, you get a totally different message. This is bi-weekly. You see a pretty clear trend. Daily, if you summarize same data, right? Summarize daily. A little bit fluctuation and a little bit trend can be seen. If you go by hourly, you mostly see noises. It's hardly to see any trend. Anyone disagree? Okay, so the message over here is, at least in the situation of lack of data, I personally, my experience is 10 level resolution may be an overkill. It's unnecessary. So it's one of the directions. Essentially, I'm thinking about we can simplify it and make it easier, and it's more effective and so forth. So what ChatGPT is offering, suggesting to deal with lack of data. So I did a little bit, play with that. It's like last year or so. It suggested 5 like directions. If you look at that, they are all widely known and widely used, like expert judgment, historical data, simulation, extrapolation, collaboration. That's what the ChatGPT can say. It's a safe answer, and in the same time, it's a widely known thing. Another option that's not touched by ChatGPT, but I personally like, that is a simpler risk analysis. That's essentially my previous environment engineering was doing. They are using project management practice risk register instead of FMEA. It's try to accomplish similar things, try to highlight risks and try to identify what actions to take. So, okay. So the direction I'm leaning from here is, hopefully it's getting clear, a little bit clearer now, right? I'm thinking about, especially when it's in lack of data, we want to try simpler risk analysis practice. And then how it's applied to FMEA, there are a little bit nitty-gritty details that's worth to be clarified. Okay, comments, questions? Okay, so this is example of simpler risk analysis. Usually it involves fewer risk component and fewer levels, like 3 or 5 instead of 10. And this is a very typical risk matrix and widely used in project management arena. And another part is, in my practice, I also feel like sometimes we may even don't need a risk component, to break it down into different aspects of the risk. A single index may be enough to drive for actions. So that's another thing. I mean, I'm going to share example and try to highlight in certain situations. So the overall, hopefully by now, it's getting a little bit more clear, right? And I personally feel like, at least when we are lack of data, we can consider 3 levels instead of 10. Example like that. And fewer dimensions of risks. So the next is how specifically it can be kind of leveraged in the FMEA. And I will break into 3 segments. One is the explanation of the approach, the FMEA light. Another is share example to demonstrate the effectiveness and efficiency. And then a little bit discussion on why to try and go this direction. Okay, so a little bit like description or formula on what this is about. That is, when the condition doesn't support deep level risk assessment, such as lack of data in high mix, low volume environment, or like early product development stage, this tiered triage approach. So that's the way I'm trying to leverage a simpler. It's a tiered approach, and it's like a triage type of practice. This simpler risk analysis technique is we use it to do initial risk assessment and hope to improve efficiency and effectiveness. And then the findings are entered into FMEA form without fully utilizing all of the field or columns or whatever. And another important aspect is typically FMEA, we should do the post-action risk assessment, right? That one, I'm strongly prefer to switch back to the traditional FMEA practice for post-action risk assessment for multiple considerations and reasons. One, at that stage, we get more data. That's one. And so our traditional RPN should be more reliable at that time. Another one, also very important, is at that stage, we're dealing with a much smaller subset of the high profile risks. And so we're not dealing with huge volume. And so it's more manageable. And also it's more serious items, more serious risks. So it's worse to go back to the traditional practice for post-action assessment. Any comments, questions before I go through the details? But this is a high-level description. Okay, so let's take a look at each of the steps or details. So if we are going in that way, like the first is to identify risk items. This can be done in various ways and by reviewing the current state and the gaps. And another part is the NUD, right? The new, unique, difficult. If we focus on those, it's more rewarding that for whatever the items identified, it's more meaningful, basically. So this part is, but this part is kind of diverged. We try volume. We care about volume as broad as possible. So for those high volume initial ideas, we don't need very serious deep diving assessment. And for those batch, the quick risk assessment should be sufficient. I personally just start from a simple index, high, medium, low risk. And if the team want to invest a little bit more, you can do a little more risk component. But the first two should be severity and occurrence should be sufficient and so forth. Comments, questions? I know some people, they dislike this, right? They're against this, but it's some food for thought, right? And you don't have to do exact same thing, but hopefully you get the point of the idea and can leverage some aspect of that. Okay, so enable to do those, like to support the quick assessment, simple assessment, some of the details, for example, if you want to break down to the risk dimension or component, likelihood and impact probably is sufficient. And if you really want to include the detection, that's fine. If you don't, that can be just treated as a medium, by default and so forth. So that's another aspect. I don't know how many people realize. If you have no information about any risk or any risk aspect, the default should be medium. So that it's not low, not high. If you know nothing, default should be medium, moderate. Okay, and the next is the decision side. That is based on the quick risk assessment, the team is able to decide which ones we're going to react on, take actions, which ones we don't. And to me, this is the default setting. That is high level risk, by default, take action, low level risk, no action required, medium, optional, or discretionary. This is kind of how I see it. To me, that's the biggest value RPN is adding. That's to decide, to drive for actions. But it can be accomplished through a very simple assessment. And if you are not sure about your simple risk assessment, you can go more conservative way. You simply just take action against all of the medium, moderate risks. So that will make you bring you to the safer ground, essentially. So that's one. And another aspect that is why I personally just don't pay too much attention to RPN is, I don't know how many people noticed and realized, that is, there's another big driver for action taking. That is a return on investment. It's my observation that in many cases, for low risk item, the team still decide to take actions. Why? What's behind that is it's simple, easy. If any action bring you sufficient return on investment, it doesn't matter if the risk is high or low, as long as it makes business sense. That's one aspect. Another aspect is how reliable is your risk assessment. As I mentioned earlier, usually our RPN or risk assessment itself is not very reliable because of, in many cases, because of the data availability and so forth. And also in our extreme case, right? And if you see no failure, it may be low, but as soon as you see the very first failure, it moved from low to high. So risk assessment is usually not very reliable. In that case, why not to go with the safer direction? As long as we have it make business sense, we are going to take actions to either eliminate or mitigate the risk. Comments, questions? Okay, if no, we will keep moving. The next is the connection to the FMEA side. That is the result, the finding of those simpler assessment can be matched or mapped into FMEA form. Essentially, your risk goes to the failure mode. Risk rating goes to RPN. And those are some of the details that you can use to map those things. For example, high risk, you can simply just use 300, a high level RPN, or moderate 125 or low, things like that. If you are breaking down into component, you can follow a certain level as well. And that should be sufficient for initial or triage stage of risk assessment. And again, if you are not assessing a certain component like detection, by default, just use medium, moderate, for initial assessment. And then actions goes to the action place. And the rest of the field, you populate at will, basically, right? And if it's required or requested by people, feel free to populate. If not required, I personally will leave them, off. And I don't worry too much. And again, this is we're talking about the situation is not regulated by agencies or customers, and not extremely risk aversion. For anything fly to the sky or outer space, probably we don't want to consider this option. That's more serious, basically. But for our like daily application environment, and nobody is going to get hurt, and those simpler, quick assessment can gain a lot of efficiency, and it's rewarding in another way from the business perspective. Comments, questions? Okay, So with that, in that direction, so here is the scale that in my previous environment, we adopted. You see, instead of doing 10, another option is we do 3-level scale, especially for the initial and for severity, for occurrence, for detections. At least for initial path of the risk assessment, we can just go to this level because 3-level scale is good enough to drive for actions. To me, that's the key of RPN. Essentially, it's driving for actions, right? As long as you have a meaningful way to drive for actions, risk assessment, it doesn't help anymore further. Comments, questions? Okay, with that, I'm going to share example just to highlight how much it can improve from effectiveness and efficiency perspective. So in my previous environment, we developed a kind of a certain Kaizen type of special event. That is a 3-day long we end up with. It's a combination of both design for manufacturability assembly and FMEA. It's a joint event. And a little bit more information about this. The same event, it tried to address a bunch of similar things, like design review, design for certain things, modularity, lean manufacturing, field installation, and FMEA for design, process, and application. Why? Here are some of the justification or reasons. Because if you look into it, most of those activities, they have similar intent. Just look at same thing from different angle, but they have similar things they're trying to accomplish. That is to identify problems and eliminate problems in the future. So in that case, why not join force? Kind of one stone kill a bunch of birds, basically. Comments, questions? So we tried various like forms and durations, right? We tried shorter ones, 2 days. We tried 4 week long, and we end up with 3 day. It sounds like it's suit for that particular environment and worked very well. So here is the kind of details about that 3-day event. And there are like preparation stage, and as you can see, and if you look into details, some like essentially at the beginning of the event, there are preparation, right? At the beginning of the event, you review voice of customer, VOC, and you do tear down. This is typically done after the very first prototype, basically when that become available. And so you can touch and feel, play with that, and tear down, put it back, and so forth, get a feel. And then we move into the stage, we try to identify what's wrong, what are the concerns and problems. And then the team quickly assess the concerns and the problems, just a simple index, high, medium, low. And those at the side, a subset of the team can enter into FMEA. But for the event, we start from identifying what are the problems or concerns. Prioritize simply, quickly, and then we quickly move into improve solution stage. And hopefully you can see at least half of the time of the 3 days are spent on what to do to resolve, to improve the problems. That's where we spend most of the time. And that's against whatever identified the problems, the concerns. And then there are some wrap-ups and stuff. And the output is sufficient, output of this event is sufficient to enter into FMEA, to log on things. Comments, questions for this practice? So at the high level is we study like VOC, what's needed, and what's the current state of the prototype. And then we try to identify problems, and we spend most of the time, the whole team, try to think for those problems identified, from big ones, high level problems, and to lower level ones, what we can do to eliminate, mitigate those problems. That's where we spend most of the time. And then a little bit of wrap up. Comments, questions? Okay, if no, we will move on to see an actual example. So this is one of the example, kind of we tried this. It's called optical distribution frame, ODF. So it's widely used in data center, and this is to connect fiber and terminate and split and merge and so forth. So in data center, you see rows and rows of this type of frames. And the team is doing a new generation of that. So what the team can accomplish or accomplished in 3 days, the team first identified 140 rated concerns and risks against this prototype, which specifically 80 some in 7 categories about design, 30 some in 8 categories about process, and almost 30 in 4 categories about application, the field installation, and so forth. So that's the magnitude of the problems identified within that 3 days. But it's only the first day, essentially. First day, the team is able to accomplish that. More importantly, the biggest part of the event, the team is able to generate almost 70 rated improvement ideas, which almost 50 comes in sketches and drawings, and 20 in verbal, like text or whatever, verbiage. Like drawing, example like that. It's just the idea comes in at this level to this much details. Comments, questions? So hopefully people get a feel on what we can accomplish if we apply this type of approach. Much more, and imagine how much time is needed if you do traditional FMEA to go through 140 concerns, how much time is needed? Not to mention the actual improvement ideas to eliminate or mitigate those concerns. Comments, questions? Okay, so that's just the example of what this practice can bring in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. The last discussion is about why the diluted FMEA is actually there are scientific foundations to do that, to take this approach. The tiered triage, right? So first, triaging is widely used in medical, field. It's essentially just to better allocate your limited resource to where it's most needed, most value added, essentially, right? So triaging. And if you look at our engineering practice, you see similar things. It's not only limited to medical. So think about use sequential DOE. Use DOE as an example. So if you think about DOE, the promise is if you follow this magic structure, I'm going to give you efficiency and effectiveness. I'm going to save resource, save money to get you a lot more usable data and with less resources. That's the promise of DOE. Essentially, through a special structure, it's going to deliver the efficiency and effectiveness. That's DOE. But in practice, it's never a DOE. Usually, it's not done by a single round. Like rarely people do a catch-all DOE. I'm going to design a perfect DOE. I'm going to address everything. Rather, in practice, it's done in a tiered approach, sequential DOE, sequentially, which is at the beginning, we do screening. We survey the field wide, but we don't go very deep. Kind of try to look for which area give us more return on investment. So at the beginning, we do screening DOE. We don't do a catch-all. And once we see a good area, we go deeper, do full model DOE to study interaction and so forth. And then we find a sweet spot, we go the deepest. We do the optimization, response surface and stuff, right? So we study everything within that sweet spot, the optimal area. That's what we really do in DOE. And consequentially, there are a lot of space in the space we're studying is untouched. And why untouched through our DOE? Because it's less rewarding. It's not very rewarding. Earlier exploration tell us it doesn't help it. It's not a promising land and stuff. So that's what we do with DOE. Even though DOE already bring in efficiency and effectiveness, we will never do a catch-all DOE to study the whole field. We always try to do it in a tier way and a little bit triage at the beginning and then drill deep for the most promising area. So it's the same thing. The FMEA light approach, it's the same mentality. At the beginning, when we have huge volume of not so important concerns, we don't need to dig deep on everything. We just need to do a quick assessment to call out what's more important and then dig deeper into the more important items. That gains efficiency and effectiveness. Comments? Questions? Okay, a little bit more elaboration. One thing I want to mention, based on my observation, virtually, well, I shouldn't say absolute. I can say almost. Literally, all FMEA, we're doing a little bit pre-screening. And in many cases, it's subconsciously. And to exclude the unlikely low-risk items. We always do that. Otherwise, it will become unmanageable. So it depends on situation. I can see for aerospace satellite, we want to turn all of the stones, right? But for average daily use, we already applied pre-screening, and in many cases, unconsciously. If not, I have a very good example. And this is actually, it comes from an ESQ training. So I was kind of, when I monitor that session, I was so disappointed. This is, well, that's another story, right? In my previous environment, it's for political reason. So we hired SQ to deliver FMEA training. This is one of the exercise the instructor guided the class to do. So using this marker cap to apply FMEA, start from functions. Imagine how many functions the team identified. This many, 20 functions. So can you imagine how many failure mode is going to be discovered for something as simple as a marker cap? So I will agree if this marker cap is set to the space, like being used by astronaut, we probably want to go to this level. But for commercial marker cap, it's definitely an overkill. I'm so disappointed when I see this, basically. So that reflected that cowboy problem and why engineers, they don't like to do this without the good experience. And if you know what to do, probably this discussion is not value added. Just do, if you're familiar with, already have your routine. But for newcomers and whatever, when they don't have that good sense, they may fall into this trap. Any comments, questions? If no, so essentially my point is the presented shared practice is essentially try to do that tiered triage in a more conscious way, essentially, instead of unconscious pre-screening. Okay. Feel free to chime in, right, everyone, if you want. Okay, a little bit more. So to answer the comments from the chat earlier, why the executive want FMEA and engineer doesn't like? There are various scenarios, right? So there could be just some bureaucracy or inflexibility. The company dictated you have to use FMEA format. That's essentially my executive is trying to do. I want to dictate FMEA. Another one is, I think it also happened to that particular executive. He just feel like a buzzword has magic power. If you waive the FMEA, it's more, help prevent the problems basically. So it just, it's mentality, right? I mean, it can be a hope, but anyway. So it could be another scenario. Another one, in some cases, people just have no visibility, just don't know. They're not aware of. There are alternatives, simpler format that can be used and can be accomplished, can deliver similar things, basically. So sometimes people just don't know other options. So for example, the other alternatives like risk register or potential problem analysis. I don't know how many people are familiar with this. This is from Kevin Trigo. So remember earlier I mentioned that most of my career has been in Lean Six Sigma, right? So for a Lean Six Sigma project, when we do FMEA, we tend to do those simpler, simplified version that should be sufficient in our environment. But I understand in regulated environment, those may not be suitable. But anyway, so I think that's all I planned to be shared. And another part I think is worth noting is at any point through your triaging tiered exploration, if you realize the need to go deeper, this practice allows you to switch back to traditional practice to go deep diving on risks in FMEA at any point, any stage. So there's no problem to revert back to traditional FMEA. It's worth to highlight. With that, a quick summary. One is, in certain situations, simpler risk analysis, it can be used for initial risk assessment, and it will help efficiency and effectiveness. Another part is, out of the FMEA, the two most useful thing or items is failure mode and actions. As long as you stick to that, I think the activity should be rewarding, basically. And then there could be simpler format, like fewer dimensions and fewer levels. Another part I want to emphasize, I personally strongly favor to switch back to traditional FMEA practice for post-action risk analysis. So that's kind of the summary. That's right. I mean, I used the whole time. I don't know. Do you do you want to use a couple of minutes for any additional discussion, or you want to stop here? Sorry, I used